Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our weekly trade and tariff briefing. I guess I should say welcome back to many of you. My name is Matt Wonderly. I'm the Director of Investments at the World Trade Center, Utah. And I, once again, have the pleasure of facilitating today's conversation. If you're here for the first time, this weekly webinar series is intended to provide you with the latest information about trade and tariffs. You can view previous webinars on our YouTube channel and find updates to our tariff dashboard on our website, of course, which we'll link in the chat for you in just a few minutes. Today, we're excited to hear first from Ben Kolendar, as always, our wonderful Chief of Staff, the World Trade Center, Utah. And he'll give us updates on the tariff dashboard. And then, of course, also welcome National Security Advisor at the Office of Congressman Blake Moore, John Bleed. Really excited for this one today, everyone. And Ben, I'll pass the torch over to you for a few minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'm going to share my screen, share our dashboard as always, and just remind everyone as we go through our updates, this is available to the public, our dashboard with all of our latest tariff updates, wtcutah.com/tariffs. Link at the top that you could also, obviously if you're on here, you know how to register, but you could share it with others who may be interested. So you could just share the website with the updates in the webinar option with any other businesses or stakeholders that may be interested in these updates. So I'm gonna first talk a little bit about the Supreme Court again, just our regular update that there was no decision again today, so we'll continue to monitor that. These rulings are announced without specifics, just that the Supreme Court will release decision certain rulings. It's announced on Tuesday or Wednesday, and the specifics and the rulings are released on Friday mornings at 8 a.m. Utah time. So when we do get those updates, we will share them. Just monitoring as well the poly market in terms of where sentiment is on whether these tariffs will become legal or not. It's traditionally now gone somewhere in between 23 to 32% that the Supreme Court will support the oral arguments. We're a little on the high side at 31%. And prior to oral arguments, we were somewhere around 48%. So it looks like it's a little, the odds are increasing as this gets stretched out, that the tariffs are going to become in some form or fashion legal, or that the Supreme Court will support them. So, uh, but no decision this week. So, with that, I'm going to jump into the dashboard, and you can see right here the top item we have here is Canada. We do have a theme, I would say, this week is sort of compliance on trade deals and also other countries' trade deals. We have a couple of updates there, which may not impact you so much in terms of if you're importing, you don't care about India and the EU striking a trade deal if you're importing from India and the US, but it does clear pathway for additional conversations with the US and India. So I'm going to start with Canada. There are two updates, two threats, new threats for Canada, and this goes back to other people's trade deals. So Canada has been threatened with a 100% tariff over a pending trade deal with China. There's a lot of rhetoric back and forth between Canada about whether or not this is a trade deal and how much this should be a concern for the U.S. But essentially, the terms are related to additional ag exports from Canada to China, as well as imports of EVs from China in a relatively small number, so nothing too critical, but it's something that the US has some concern over, and that's been mentioned as a potential 100% tariff on Canada. We'll continue to monitor this one. There's nothing but a threat out there right now, and the details are also in the link provided on our dashboard. There's also, as of this morning, Canada was threatened with another 50% tariff on Canadian aircraft. There's some concern over certifications of Gulfstream in Canada and those being held back. And so that is, just an open threat right now, nothing beyond that. But, some mechanisms like the IEPA, the Open 232 could be used as well. So just something to monitor on that we'll keep an eye on and continue to provide updates on. On the compliance side for the theme this week, we're going to shift to South Korea. South Korea had there's some concerns over the compliance of the deal that was struck in terms of the terms and process and where we're at with South Korea compared to what the agreement was. So without specifics, there's just been an announcement, two sort of like an announcement and then a follow-up to that announcement. The announcement was that we're going to have higher tariffs on South Korea, given their lack of movement on some of these deal provisions. And then a follow-up update on that, that there is, the president had made some comment that, we're going to work it out. And so, a little bit of mixed messages, but just some elevated concern, but some confidence that this will be worked out in the end on the South Korea deal. Um, and finally, and this isn't an update on our dashboard, so I'm going to stop sharing. But finally, the last update that we have is we continue to monitor India, which currently sits at a 50% tariff. And, of course, the Russian Sanctions Act has been something that we've been tracking, which could take that from 50% to 525% on India. But we saw no movement there this week. We did, however, see India strike a deal with the EU relating to the EU being able to export luxury cars to India. So we saw some movement there, which in theory, frees up some capacity on their negotiations to turn back to the US and for the US to turn to India and make some progress on some of the discussions that have been ongoing with India. So just something to monitor. We're also keeping an eye on some 232s that are likely to come in the near future for critical minerals in commercial aircraft and jet engines. So we'll continue to keep this group updated there. And with that, I'm going to transition to John. I'm going to do the handoff on this one because, John, just so appreciate you joining us. We spoke a week or a couple of weeks ago now about Greenland on this webinar and all your guys' efforts with Denmark and what's going on there. So I'm so glad you can provide some insights to our business community. But at a high level, just as a recap for the situation with Greenland, which had some concern in our business community. On January 17th, the president had vowed increased tariffs on 8 EU countries that were not supporting the US's position on Greenland. And so, you know, that included Denmark and others, of course. And while the president was in Davos, he pulled back on that and had said, okay, we would like to have we've made progress on a framework or a deal with Greenland, so the details will be forthcoming. But we're in a good enough spot to pull back those tariff threats. But while those were enacted, this was a big concern in our community, and we were sort of socializing, okay, what do we do? And so John's been gracious enough to come on and speak with folks about where we're at with that because it's not necessarily quite clear. So just so appreciate you joining us, John, to give us the update.
Sure. Yeah, more than happy to, Ben. And it's kind of a running joke in the office right now that Rep Moore has kind of found himself as one of the leaders on Greenland and Denmark issues, somewhat on accident, actually, because he has been serving for the last year as the co-chair of the Congressional Denmark Caucus. Caucuses, if you know anything about how things work on Capitol Hill, are mostly ceremonial. They're kind of collections of members with shared interests. There's an F-35 caucus and there's a Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus and, et cetera, et cetera. And, most of the time these are just, yeah, members who have kind of shared interests and like to kind of work together on some of those issues. The reason why he's the co-chair is he's got Danish ancestry. His entire mom's side is Danish. Is very proud of that. And the state of Utah actually has, I think, the largest concentration of Americans with Danish ancestry in the United States. So there's a direct kind of connection from the old world, obviously, over to Utah there. So the kind of the position that he found himself in was, there were some concerns early on about kind of the posture that initially was taking place. He put out a joint statement with the other co-chair from the Congressional Denmark Caucus, Steny Hoyer from Maryland, which said a couple of things. I mean, it said obviously, direct threats to NATO allies are, not even something that our Congress is considering acceptable, would be off the table. And we need to be more reflective of the productive relationship we already have with Denmark, one of our strongest NATO allies. Um, my boss actually put together kind of in this period where there were some direct negotiations with or discussions with Secretary Rubio and Vice President Vance. There was a bipartisan member dinner with the Danish foreign minister. About 30 members from both parties came. That was co-chaired by Congressman Moore, with the Danish foreign minister and the Greenlandic foreign minister. Really good event. It's obviously was a very uniquely challenging period for them, but they, spoke a lot about how grateful they were that there was so much support in Congress for obviously a warm and productive relationship. So a little bit kind of on my boss's perspective on Greenland and kind of where we see things going moving forward. I would kind of break it up into a few different categories from kind of how he has put out public statements and some of the press that he's done, both in European and US based media. Is number one, Denmark's a good ally. They're an F-35 partner. They're one of our strongest intelligence partners, potentially the strongest one outside the Five Eyes grouping. They're spending 3.3% of GDP on defense. A lot of that skyrocketed actually in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and have been a model member of NATO in many ways. My boss has been very supportive of the Trump administration's efforts to increase burden sharing on the European side for our collective security. But Denmark is really showing what leadership looks like in that category. Number two, Greenland actually does matter for U.S. national security, but not necessarily in the way of that would require ownership or actual an acquisition. For those who are geopolitics nerds like me, Greenland is the spot in the globe at which all potential ballistic missile threats to the U.S. homeland would come either from Russia or from China. We've had early warning radar infrastructure on Greenland since World War II. I actually had a very strong military presence on Greenland due to our arrangement and treaty with Denmark since 1951. During the Cold War, we had upwards of 12,000 troops on Greenland, specifically kind of for that early warning infrastructure and maintenance prerogative, being very nervous about kind of where Russian missiles might be coming from. Nowadays, there's a few other reasons why Greenland matters. It's a key area for tracking Russian submarine activity in the North Atlantic. The Russian submarine fleet loves to push boundaries and push buttons to track our hemisphere and our whereabouts on the eastern seaboard. Definitely, key security concerns there. The shipping lanes that kind of enable the Russian submarine fleet to get to the North Atlantic run right past Greenland. So that matters from that angle. And as kind of in the next, if you were to project in the next, 50, 60, 70 years, if the polar ice caps, have less ice then than they do now, you're going to potentially foresee some open shipping lanes for oil tankers and gas tanker transport vehicles that countries like Russia will be paying attention to. So Greenland is obviously incredibly important for the next generation of security issues. But the bottom line that Congressman Moore was saying again in the press to other members to the administration was that the current deal that we have right now that has been in place since 1951 is essentially us getting everything we need without having to pay anything. The U.S. has effectively unlimited military access on Greenland already. We have drawn down our troop presence from, as I said, a maximum of about 12,000 people to I think now we only have about 250 or 260 airmen at Pituffik Space Base up in the northeast part of Greenland, northwest part of Greenland. That could be changed overnight if we wanted it to be. And the Danish ambassador and the Danish government have told Congressman Moore face to face that they would welcome a stronger U.S. military presence on immediately if that were to happen. So as Ben mentioned, we had the kind of the tariff threat, and we had the walk down in Davos. Thankfully, obviously, tariffs were going to be a bridge too far for a lot of members of Congress on this issue. There was no major support for that, but at the same time, very happy that we seem to have found some sort of temporary agreement. There's actually not a lot of details about what this framework looks like. There's hopefully going to be some more clarification going into the Munich Security Conference in a few weeks, but we don't have anything at the moment. There's kind of a couple different directions that I'm kind of seeing things that directions could go, and that is maybe a more permanent NATO Arctic rotation on Greenland that kind of has a more permanent focus on Arctic security that kind of gives the administration a win, which again, in our mind and in my boss's mind, we think the Arctic matters, and we think that would be a win out of all this situation. Um, you could have a kind of a modernized version of the U.S. Denmark 1951 treaty, maybe something that would, an agreement that bans future Chinese or Russian investment on Greenland, something regarding mineral rights. You'll notice that I actually didn't mention critical minerals, and the reason is why Greenland matters to national security is that Congressman Moore has expressed this in media appearances that the lack of infrastructure, the lack of access underneath ice sheets, and the lack of access to get to kind of some of these remote deposits really means that kind of the mineral discussion on Greenland is pretty untenable and pretty unlikely moving forward. We just don't anticipate any major Western mining company looking at that gargantuan project and seeing any profitability in the future. And the Danes, frankly, feel the exact same way. And even potentially the Chinese as well. The Chinese have not really shown any interest in mining Greenland for minerals because they know that it's virtually impossible. So the mineral thing is going to be thrown around, I think, probably in public statements down the road, but we don't anticipate it being a key aspect of the conversation. Um, and then the last thing is that it could actually involve new basing rights for a potentially expanded U.S. presence on Greenland moving forward. It's a little bit unknown if this would be like a status of forces deal similar to our military bases in Germany or South Korea or Japan, or if it would actually involve kind of US ownership, US sovereignty over the land of which the bases sit on. So, an example for that actually has precedence with the British Royal Air Force's air base in Cyprus, is not just a temporary basing, or no, or not temporary. It's not just a basing arrangement that the British have. It's actually sovereign British territory underneath. The United States doesn't have any of those arrangements with any other country right now. It's possible that that's kind of the middle ground, the win that comes forward from this. But that kind of a situation would require approval from both the Greenlandic Assembly and the Danish Parliament. So there would be some kind of hoops to jump through probably on that end. So that's probably all I got, Ben, on my side. But it's just to kind of conclude that we're very happy that the tariffs on our European allies because of this are not moving forward. And if there was a threat long term, there would have been a kind of a concerted effort to find a way forward and find a solution.
Great. Thank you, John. I do have a question relating to what I'm anticipating. While some of our businesses are sort of thinking through, what are my questions? And just a reminder, feel free to drop it in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to those questions. But one of the questions I have is a lot of the ways that we look at things, okay, this content is helpful in terms of a crystal ball for businesses. So you hear a lot of this rhetoric and you don't know what's real or not, or how to navigate that if you're importing products from the EU. How, these tariffs were threatened, pulled back for a framework deal. There were some later comments that this was like a forever deal, and then didn't really hear much from the Danish afterward. So, um, you know, what what are the likelihood, what is the likelihood in your mind on these tariffs potentially coming back? Is that coin flip, or at least the
No.
threat of the tariffs? Is
Yeah.
it fairly minimal? What's that look like from your
Yeah.
outlook? I'm
Yeah.
not gonna, we are gonna quote you on this, but we're not gonna like hold you to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think that I'm not going to entirely say that the tariffs as leverage in the past, or even if you were to date back to kind of the first administration, tariffs as leverage points haven't been gotten short-term wins of value for U.S. interests. I think in this case, I think the administration rightly knew that the markets were responding very, very poorly to the threat of not just like additional tariffs, but they were responding and building into kind of larger fissures in the U.S. European relationship. I mean, this is our largest source of foreign direct investment. It's our largest security partner. I think the long view concerns from investors were one of the reasons why the administration was trying to find a kind of a solution and a way out. To that end, my kind of personal prediction is that they're not going to want to necessarily open up that kind of worms again. If there's another issue that comes up in the transatlantic relationship, of which there are many, and of which the Europeans are not perfect, and when we have many concerns about non-competitive regulatory behavior and market access issues, like these are things that we need to find solutions for long term, and we need to press on and press U.S. interest where we can. But I think on this particular issue, specific to Greenland, it's not something I anticipate coming back.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Right.
I really appreciate you taking the time as well. There's some questions pouring in, but one question I get regularly is if this can be solved diplomatically, this Greenland issue, why is there the threat of war? And is this more of a containment strategy by the United States or a deterrence strategy? Can you elaborate on that a little bit more and get into some more detail?
Just in terms of the like, why would we be putting like any kind of like hard threat action or
Correct.
hard threat in this particular case? Yeah.
Correct.
I think again, the way that what my boss would say, and he has said, is that there was never any serious discussion or serious threat of the 11th Airborne coming in and landing on Greenland and effectively severing the NATO alliance permanently. That, I mean, that would be a catastrophic geopolitical event that would be horrible for U.S. interests. And every member and members were not just Rep Moore were saying this, but many others as well. And we never had any kind of like major concerns that was going to be happening. Obviously, you have economic jostling and kind of tariff threats that we unfortunately dealt with. But no, I think long term, what we as the co-chairs of the caucus are trying to do, we're trying to emphasize the really, really strong ties that we have with an ally like the Kingdom of Denmark. We're trying to emphasize that Arctic security matters, and here's the areas where which we can collaborate. But in terms of, do we think there's an active threat of hard power being used by the United States in this situation? Our answer is no. No.
Great, great. One question in the chat here from Rich. How should a person think about VAT taxes and tariffs?
Uh, Great question.
I might go a little bit
Yeah.
further as well, John. Not just a person, maybe even a business. How should they be thinking about this?
Well, I wish I had an additional tax expert on here to talk VAT. It's not really an area, a strong suit of mine. I know that that really the more kind of uncertainty from our if you're doing business transatlantically, the more uncertain is going to be coming from what types of reciprocal tariffs the administration is thinking about or considering at the moment. VAT discussions and decisions are going to be a European domestic issue, and kind of not really in the remit of U.S. foreign policy or U.S. trade policy. Those are going to be domestic tax decisions from those sources. So I'm probably not the best person to answer that question.
I can
Yeah,
say, however,
yeah.
one thing that we are tracking, and I'll share this on our tariff dashboard as well, um, relating to the Greenland situation, of course, yeah, this doesn't necessarily tie in, but when you look at USTR, there's an active 301 investigation underway in terms of how do we think about um, countries with that and how do we respond to it? And there are some
Mhm.
countries listed for concerns on there. And so there's a lot of materials in terms of where the status is with that process on our website. It is something that's been raised by the administration, but
Yeah,
I don't,
yeah.
yeah,
And I would add that like it's been raised by successive administrations. So I mean, even Democratic and Republican. I
yeah,
mean, it's been a long-standing issue. Yeah.
yeah, great. All right.
Few
I-
minutes left. I'm not sure if there's any other questions. We do have some time if you do want to pop in a question in the chat or into the Q&A. But while we wait for maybe one or two more questions, John, I'm curious to know your take on these critical minerals. It's really interesting. I mean, we've got a lot
Mhm.
of critical minerals news in Utah as of late. I'm sure you're
Yep.
quite aware. Really
Hmm.
happy about that. Utah is a mining state. Does this
Yep.
take any of the weight off of the critical minerals conversation in Greenland, or how do they maybe
Yeah.
complement each other, go hand in hand?
Yeah. I mean, I think what it does is it puts more attention on actual success stories like Utah. I think we want to be an office that's pointing towards, tangible opportunities, actual wins, where can the United States be a player in the mineral space? And I mean, frankly, again, every expert that I've spoken with, every Danish diplomat or that my boss is engaged with, there's been this kind of recurring theme of the infrastructure challenges. I mean, frankly, the daylight and temperature challenges. I mean, it's dark 24 hours a day, half 6 months out of the year in Greenland, in parts of Greenland. The process by which you would have to go underneath layers and layers and layers of ice sheets in the middle of a really, really rough environment with no roads, no transport infrastructure, nothing. It's an almost, I mean, it's an almost impossible venture to think about. So that 200 years from now, is the situation different? Like, okay, maybe. But right now, it is not realistic to think that Greenland is a source for mineral extraction. And that's again, that's me speaking as an advisor to a member of Congress and not from any other position like that. But that's that's the position that I have.
Any oil and gas found yet as well?
I'm sure. Oh, I mean, I think the seabeds up there are a very big point of interest for the Russians, I would say. Yeah.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Excellent. Ben, any other questions on your end?
no, just to say thanks, Sean.
Yeah, this has been a great
Yeah.
Great
conversation,
having.
enlightening.
No, I mean, happy to help, and I can put here. I'll put my contact information in the chat if any other companies on the call want to speak to this issue or anything else.
Thank you, John. Take advantage of that. If you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to him via email. And yeah, really, really great overview, John. Thank you again. Tell Congressman Moore hello from us, and we look forward to the next conversation.
Great, great. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.